Starts with a question, why should I fear in the days of evil? When the iniquity at my heels surrounds me. What are you afraid of? I wasn't expecting an answer, but something scares you, doesn't it? I mean, all of us. Now, I know every once in a while you run into somebody and say, I'm not afraid of anything, but they are either lying or they're just slap nuts. In fact, they're probably so nutty that squirrels follow them around, because everybody is afraid of something. Do you know, I had somebody tell me just the other day that they don't watch scary movies because they scare them. And I thought, isn't that the point? But they're afraid of them. And we're afraid of all kinds of things. We really are. Truth be told, sometimes we're afraid of strange things, or we're afraid in degrees that kind of take us out of bounds. They call that an unreasonable fear. They call it a phobia. You're afraid of something that's probably not reasonable. And I got to tell you, I'm a little phobic about heights. And somewhere in my early 50s, it came on me, and it was worse at one time than it is now. But I think anybody's reasonable to be afraid of falling from a great height, but I get out of bounds with it. And I got to tell you, some things scare me that wouldn't scare others. I can watch a movie on TV or at the movies, and if somebody's climbing up like a mountain, my stomach goes in a knot, and sometimes I cannot watch it. And I know they're in a studio, and they're probably 3 feet off the ground, but it just gets me. I do not want to be a rock climber. And if I ever climbed a rock wall, they better bring it down to me, because I am not a height guy. Now, I don't mind airplanes. It doesn't make sense. That's the thing. It's not reasonable. So, what are you afraid of? Because we all have fears. Kind of an interesting thing. The psalmist speaks of fear in this psalm. Now, that's not the theme of the psalm, but it's in here. And it's very, golly, man, it's pertinent. I think we can all identify, right? At least to a degree. It would be nice if when you come to Jesus Christ, He just automatically banished all the fear from your life. And I'm sure there's somebody right now somewhere teaching that. But the truth of the matter is, maybe it works that way sometimes, but not normally. Even the Apostle Paul, when he was talking about things he endured once, he said, I have fears for things that are without. And he was a pretty gutsy guy. So, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but becoming a believer does not automatically remove fear from your life. That is a matter of growing in faith and maturity. So I want to talk a little bit about fear this morning, because I suspect we all deal with something. Now, if you're afraid of bears, you probably don't have to deal with it a lot where we are. Or if you have a deathly fear of I don't know, kangaroos, you're probably not dealing with it a lot. If you have fear of being frozen alive, you're probably not going to deal with it a lot. But I bet there's something you deal with. So let's talk a little bit. A couple of things this morning. First thing, and this is one we're already kind of treading on. Fear is very real. I think we live in a world of fearful people. I think the psalmist got that. So when he asked this question, why should I fear? Well, that's a good question. Why should I fear? And then he admitted, you notice he immediately admits that there are things to be afraid of out there. He said, you notice this was not a Roosevelt thing. We have nothing to fear but fear itself. I always thought, where did that come from? That makes no sense at all. It was a good saying, but he doesn't say that. He doesn't say, why should I fear? There's nothing to be afraid of. He said, why should I fear in the days of evil? When iniquity at my heels surrounds me. That's kind of a stinging question. He admits that, golly, there are days of evil. You know what that means? Really bad days. Really bad days. Chris Ballinger was talking this morning about a really bad day a few years ago. It was his 40th birthday. That was bad enough. And then the coffee shop burned down. They found out their car engine had blown up. And they found out that their wife was very unexpectedly pregnant, all on the same day. Now, the pregnancy, when it's unexpected, it turns out to be a... We went through one of those, Donna and I did. And the boy has been a tremendous blessing to us, but I got to tell you, it was not welcome news that morning. So, it was a bad day. Have you ever had a bad day? I have 5 or 6 or 7 bad days in my life I can remember. I've lived a pretty good number of days, and a lot of them are blurred out, and I have no memory of them at all. But there are a few I remember. They were bad days. I'm not talking about a bad hair day. You know, last Sunday night in Awana was crazy hair night. And I did this like 10 times. These kids would come over, and I'd say, "What does it do with your hair? Your hair looks absolutely crazy." And every single one of them said, "It's crazy hair night." Oh, I said, well, that explains it. And then I'd go on to the next one, and I got the same response every time. And that's okay on crazy hair night. But it's not okay other times. But this is not that. This is a bad day. And then on top of that, you got iniquity nipping at your heels. Now, iniquity, that is a word for lawlessness, willfulness, I can't think of a better way. A self-determination. We think of iniquity, we automatically think of sin, but it's not necessarily something that is sin, though it is something that can become sin. It's when you say, "I am doing this, and I don't care what God says, and I don't care what God thinks, I'm doing it. And I'm going to have my way. I'm listening to Frank Sinatra all day. I did it my way, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be willful." It's iniquity. And he said iniquity is surrounding us. You know, he lived at a time and in a place where there was a lot of lawlessness going on. And that's a frightening thing. Sure was for this guy. So I think it'd be good for us to own it. It's a scary world, isn't it? We're living in a boom town. You know, I'd never lived in a boom town. I came to Crane when it was a bus town. Oil was $6.70 a barrel. And there wasn't anybody making any money. And nobody was moving here. And some of you remember those days. But this is just different. It's boom. And if there's anything you read and know about boom towns, is they tend to have a lot of lawlessness. It just kind of comes with it. People are moving in. They're separated from their families. They're tired. They're overworked. They're stressed. Maybe at work they're misused. And they don't have good moral moorings to start. And they lapse into lawlessness quickly. And days become evil. And we read about them in the newspaper. Guys go someplace and they'll watch some young lady engaging in something she shouldn't, and they don't even know her, and they end up knifing each other in a parking lot because they have lapsed into lawlessness, and it gets evil. And I read about things that just make me shake my head sometimes, and nighttime only heightens the danger. And, you know, even if you just drive in traffic, there's a lot of lawlessness out there. Somebody will, and I mentioned this before, if we are in a town that if somebody puts on a turn signal, they think that gives them the right of way. So they can make an illegal lane change and drive you into a wall, but they signaled. And God have mercy on your soul if you have the temerity to honk. You're likely to get shot. Why? Well, we've lapsed into lawlessness. And sometimes there's fear in our own families, and I am sure that just in a group this size, some of you are living in atmospheres that are frightening. And there are things maybe you ought to deal with, but you're afraid to. Truth is, guys, as believers, we have an enemy. He's very real, and he doesn't fight fair. It'd be nice if everybody always fought according to the Marquis of Queensberry rules. But Satan doesn't. And he cannot get a hold of your soul. If you're a born-again believer, he cannot get a hold of your soul. You need to get hold of that. When you become a child of God, you are in the family. Well, yeah, but preacher, if I mess up, aren't I out of the family? Well, were your kids? There may have been a time or two when my kids wished they were in a different family, especially when they disobeyed, but they were mine. They weren't a village's. They were mine. And I dealt with them. They're in the family. But they didn't come home and I said, I thought I told you to cut the lawn. Well, Dad, I didn't. All right, you're out of the family. You're out. Get your stuff. You're out. God doesn't do that either. But he does deal with you. But hear me, if you are in the family, Satan cannot get your soul. But if he can, he will wreck your life. Well, days can be bad. Iniquity is real. So, the psalmist asks, why should I fear? And our first thought with that is, well, why not? Seems kind of healthy to me. There are certain things it's good to have a healthy fear of. Anybody, do I have a witness on that? Would you agree with that? Yeah, I know I've shared this before, but I remember when I was like 4 years old. Here's one of those days. And my mom is ironing. Now, ironing was a little different in those days. There was no Teflon on the iron, and she had a spray bottle. You guys remember that? Spray, spray, spray. Or she'd shake it out of this thing, and she would iron. And she got through. There was no timer on those irons. She got through. She unplugged it. I'm standing watching her, and she walked off, and I had this question in my mind. I wonder if when you unplug that iron, it immediately cools off. So I tested it out. I grabbed the iron, and I put my hand up against it. Only did that once. And I remember that. Mom, I don't know if you've noticed, they got all kinds of treatment for a burn, and none of it helps. So she put, I don't know what, probably Vaseline. I don't know what it was. She said, here, and it still hurt. And I can almost feel that now. Do you know what? I have got a healthy fear of a hot iron. I learned it when I was about 4, and I have never burned my hand on an iron since then. If you tried to drop one on my head, I would sense it. It's healthy. And so, why should I fear? Well, why not? Well, let me give you a couple of reasons why not to be afraid, certainly in some realms. Here we go. 2 reasons. First one's found in Romans chapter 8, verse 31, and it's in a rhetorical question. Here's what it says. Some of you could quote this to me right now. It said, what shall we say to these things? Now, this is a summation because he has just spent the better part of a chapter telling us this. If God is for us, who can be against us? For the better part of the 8th chapter, Paul has been showing us that God is for us. Now, what does that truth mean? Well, it doesn't mean that we don't have enemies, because we do. Now, some of you are like me. You're thinking, how can anybody not like me? But there's someone that doesn't. Some of us have a lot of enemies. Some of us have earned them. But we all have enemies. Here's what that tells us. Now, I want you to get this. If you're a believer in Jesus Christ, God is not one of them. Some people are so afraid of God. Now, a reverential, awing fear is healthy, but this thing that God is up there and He is just hoping He can catch me bending over so He can give me a good swift kick. God is hoping I'll fail. He cannot wait to just roll a rock out of heaven on my head. Believe me, the first time I miss my tithe, God is going to crush me. He's just waiting. Believe me. Yes, I give. I pay that. I'm scared not to because God is after me, man. God is just, He may love me. He said He loves me, but we all know He doesn't like me. And He is waiting for an excuse. You ever known somebody that you just, the first time you saw them, you thought, that person needs to be slapped? And that's the way God feels about me, and He's wanting to work His way across the room and give me a good smack. God is a fearful thing. Well, it is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of a living God in judgment. But hear me, if you're a believer, God is for you. Well, that's a good thing. I got enough trouble without that. You know, the Bible says that friendship with the world is enmity with God. It means you set God up as your enemy. But listen, if you're a child of God, yeah, He knows you stumble, and you won't ever get over that in this life. But He's for you. And as He watches you learn to walk, He's always willing to help you up. And He delights in you. Now, if you grew up in legalism the way I did, that is something you have to remind yourself of probably daily. God